They nailed samurai heads to ships and built pyramids of skulls from their enemies, and they almost did it to Japan. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire spanned half the known world, and its armies were hell-bent on erasing the samurai. Kublai Khan's invasion fleets brought tens of thousands of warriors to Japan's shores, ready to burn the cities and slaughter the people. Twice they invaded with overwhelming force, and twice a mysterious divine wind turned the Mongol navy into splinters. Was it sheer luck, an act of God, or the fierce spirit of the samurai that saved Japan from annihilation? This is the epic, jaw-dropping true story of Mongol versus samurai, the invasion that changed Japan forever. In the late 1200s, two legendary forces stood on a collision course. On one side, the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan was the most formidable war machine on the planet. A vast cavalry army that had stormed across Asia and crushed ancient kingdoms. On the other, the samurai of Japan, an elite warrior class famed for their swordsmanship, honor, and tenacity, but they had never faced an enemy like this. When the Mongols set out to invade, it wasn't just a battle for territory, but a clash of cultures and warfare styles. The fate of Japan hung in the balance. Would the fiercely independent samurai be overwhelmed by the Mongol onslaught? Or did destiny have other plans? Strap in as we journey back to medieval Japan, set the stage for an extraordinary confrontation, and witness how a kamikaze typhoon turned the tides of history. The threat arrived in 1268 with a message from Kublai Khan, a demand that Japan submit to Mongol rule or face invasion. Imagine the reaction. Japan was a proud, isolated nation that had never been conquered by a foreign power. The ruling Kamakura shogunate, led by Regent Hōjō Tokimune, bristled at the very idea of bowing to a distant emperor. They ignored Kublai's letters. Some envoys were sent back with no answer. Later ones were executed on Tokimune's orders, a bold act of defiance that made war all but inevitable. Japan was essentially telling the world's largest empire, "We will never surrender." It was a daring stance, and a dangerous one, given the odds. Kublai Khan was not a man to take no for an answer. By 1274, he gathered a massive invasion force to make Japan pay attention. Picture the scene. On a gray autumn day, the people of Tsushima Island, between Korea and Japan, spot hundreds of strange ships on the horizon. This is the Mongol vanguard, a combined force of Mongols, Chinese, and Koreans, approximately 800 ships carrying 30,000 warriors. The Mongol Empire had already subjugated Korea and the Chinese Song dynasty, and now their soldiers packed these ships armed to the teeth. For the inhabitants of tiny Tsushima, it's a nightmare made real. The Mongols land on Tsushima's beaches with thunderous force. Local samurai, like the island's governor Sukakuni, gather a small band of warriors to resist. These Japanese defenders are few, dozens against thousands, but they charge bravely into the surf to meet the invaders. What follows is a massacre. The Mongol war machine shows no mercy. They cut down the samurai and then rampage across the island. Villages are torched. It's said the Mongols slaughtered Tsushima's population, even women and children, to terrorize the Japanese into submission. Within days, Tsushima is left in ruins, a grim warning of what's coming for the rest of Japan. Fresh off this brutal victory, the Mongol fleet sails on to Iki Island, then heads for the main Japanese island of Kyushu. Panic and alarm spread among the Japanese. They now know the Mongols are coming, and that they fight unlike any enemy Japan has ever seen. The invaders finally land at Hakata Bay, near the city of Dazaifu in Kyushu, in November 1274. Waiting for them on the beaches are several thousand samurai and their retainers, the last line of defense between the Mongols and the Japanese mainland. The Battle of Hakata Bay begins with a confrontation that must have felt like a collision of two different worlds. According to Japanese custom, a samurai warrior stepped forward and shouted out his lineage, formally challenging the enemy to single combat, the traditional way to start a battle with honor. But the Mongols did not play by these rules. Instead of answering the duel, they responded with a volley of arrows and an uproar of laughter. Drums thundered signals across the Mongol lines, and rows of shield-bearing soldiers marched in tight formation. Before the samurai knew it, bombs were exploding in their midst. Metal and paper grenades lobbed by the Mongols, erupting with deafening booms. The blasts sent shockwaves through the Japanese ranks. Horses reared and bucked in terror, and samurai who had never heard such thunder on a battlefield were momentarily stunned. One chronicle described how the explosions blinded eyes and deafened ears, leaving the samurai so disoriented they could hardly tell east from west. The Mongol warriors pressed this advantage, charging all together in a mass rather than seeking out individual duels. It was a completely new kind of warfare for the Japanese. For hours, chaos reigned on Hakata Bay's shores. The samurai fought valiantly, expert archers and swordsmen trying every trick they knew. But the Mongols' coordinated tactics were overwhelming. A samurai might single out one opponent for a sword duel, only to be swarmed by several enemy soldiers at once. The Mongol forces, well-drilled and communicating with gongs and flags, advanced like a tidal wave, pushing the Japanese back. By nightfall, the invaders had gained the beachhead. Parts of Hakata were burning. The samurai defenders, suffering heavy casualties, with some accounts say 1/3 of them fell in that single day, pulled back a few kilometers inland, preparing for a last stand at a defensive position. Japan's situation looked serious. The invaders seemed unstoppable. Yet, that very night, the tide turned in a way no one expected. Out of the darkness, storm clouds gathered over the bay. As the Mongol commanders debated their next move, some urging to press on, others cautious of overextending, a sudden storm blew in. Wind howled and rain lashed down. In the black of night, the Mongol fleet at anchor found itself in danger. Ships dragged anchor and smashed against each other. Whether the storm was fully a typhoon or just a fierce storm, by morning many Mongol ships were gone, wrecked on the rocks or blown out to sea. The invasion force, already low on supplies and now fearing another Japanese counterattack, chose to withdraw. The surviving Mongols sailed home abruptly. The Japanese woke to an empty horizon and a miraculous deliverance. They had been bloodied but not conquered. News spread that the gods had sent a divine wind to save Japan. This was the origin of the legend of the Kamikaze, the divine wind that would only grow in years to come. The Japanese knew this retreat was only temporary. After the 1274 invasion, Japan understood just how dangerous the Mongol threat was. Hōjō Tokimune and his government immediately began strengthening the nation's defenses. They ordered the construction of the Genko Borui, an extensive stone wall stretching along the Hakata Bay coast. This seawall, about 2 meters high and built with a thick earthen rampart, was designed to prevent Mongol ships from landing easily. For the first time, Japan fortified its coastline, a massive undertaking that showed how seriously they took the prospect of the Mongols' return. Samurai from all over Japan, especially Kyushu, were mobilized and put on high alert. They drilled and prepared, their pride wounded but their resolve hardened. No one forgot the shock of that first battle, and many samurai were eager for redemption. On the other side of the sea, Kublai Khan was furious at the setback. He saw Japan's refusal to submit and the loss of his fleet as an affront that had to be answered. Over the next few years, he conquered the rest of China, giving him even greater resources to throw at Japan. He built an even larger invasion force for round 2. By 1281, the Great Khan had assembled what is believed to be one of the largest armadas in world history up to that time. Some sources claim 4,400 ships carrying 140,000 men in total. Modern historians debate the exact numbers, but there's no doubt the second invasion force was immense, several times larger than the first. This time, the Mongols planned a two-pronged assault. One fleet sailing from Korea and another from southern China. The strategy was to hit Japan with a giant pincer movement, overwhelming the defenders with sheer numbers. As Japan held its breath, the Mongols made their opening moves. In early June 1281, the Mongol Eastern Fleet struck the outlying islands once again. Tsushima and Iki, still recovering from the last onslaught, were ravaged a second time. Mongol warriors, now even more numerous, swarmed ashore and crushed the local samurai garrisons. The ferocity was undiminished. According to accounts, Thousands of islanders were killed, even children. The islands fell quickly. The invaders used them as forward bases while awaiting the larger southern fleet from China. The plan was for both Mongol fleets to link up before hitting the main islands. But communication and discipline in the Mongol command weren't perfect. The impatient Eastern Fleet commanders decided not to wait for all reinforcements. In late June 1281, they forged ahead towards Kyushu on their own, eager to get conquest underway. When the Mongol armada appeared off Hakata Bay this time, the Japanese were ready and waiting. The sight must have been incredible. Hundreds upon hundreds of ships massing on the sea, banners flapping, the sun glinting off weapons and armor. But unlike in 1274, the invaders no longer found an undefended shoreline. Stretching across the beaches was the new stone wall, and behind it stood ranks of samurai archers and spearmen. As Mongol ships attempted to close in, they encountered fierce resistance. Waves of arrows rained down from the Japanese defenders on the walls, repulsing landing parties. Some Mongol detachments tried to land further down the coast or at other provinces like Nagato, but they met stiff opposition and had to fall back. The invading army was learning that the Japanese had used the last 7 years well. This was not the easy beach landing of 1274. Frustrated in their attempt to storm ashore, the Mongol Eastern Fleet pulled back and occupied some smaller islands off the coast to regroup. Their idea was to use these as staging areas for raids. However, the samurai were not content sitting behind their walls. They took the fight to the enemy in daring counterattacks. Small bands of samurai launched nighttime raids on the Mongol fleet, rowing out in small boats under cover of darkness. These commandos would slip aboard enemy ships, engage in fierce deck fights, and even set ships on fire. One famous warrior, Kusano Jiro, is credited with infiltrating a Mongol ship at night, setting it ablaze and taking 21 enemy heads as trophies. A bloody testament to samurai bravery and the very personal nature of their fight. Another samurai, Kawano Michiari, led a daylight raid with just a couple of boats. He managed to board a Mongol vessel and cut down a formidable Mongol giant in single combat. These exploits became the stuff of legend. To the Mongols, the Japanese tactics, night ambushes, small unit strikes, were unnerving, almost like how guerrilla warfare can fluster a larger army. The samurai were exploiting every advantage of fighting on home turf. For weeks, a tense stalemate ensued. The Mongol Eastern Fleet could not break through at Hakata, and the Japanese could not drive them off completely. By mid-July, the vast southern fleet from China finally arrived, swelling the Mongol numbers further. Now the full might of Kublai's invasion was assembled. Historical records describe that the entire country of Japan trembled at the sight of this armada. Rumors flew of endless enemy soldiers pouring onto Japanese soil if the Mongols landed successfully. Sensing the desperation, Regent Tokimune even went to Shinto shrines to pray for divine intervention, offering his own life to the gods in exchange for the nation's salvation. This was truly an against-all-odds moment, the kind of moment when a nation holds its breath. The pinnacle came in August 1281, in a finale so dramatic that it swerved into the realm of legend. The Mongol invasion force, now enormous and heavily armed, finally advanced in unison toward Hakata Bay. A full-scale landing battle erupted as thousands of samurai clashed with waves of Mongol warriors along the fortifications and fields of Kyushu. The fighting raged for 2 weeks in sweltering summer heat. Neither side could land a decisive blow. The samurai's defensive lines and relentless harassment kept the Mongols at bay, but they couldn't force the invaders to retreat either. Conversely, the Mongols were too many to be easily beaten, yet they struggled to break the samurai's resistance. It was a brutal deadlock. Then nature delivered its fateful verdict. In the second week of August, the air grew thick and the winds began to howl. Seasoned Korean and Chinese sailors in the Mongol fleet looked anxiously at the darkening sky. They recognized the signs of a typhoon. By August 15th, 1281, a monstrous storm crashed into Kyushu. For the Mongols, it was a catastrophe unfolding in real time. Imagine the scene. One moment, the invasion armada lies off the coast, hundreds upon hundreds of ships bobbing with troops ready to swarm the shores. The next, the horizon vanishes behind sheets of driving rain and salt spray. Furious winds roar out of the sky, whipping the sea into mountains of water. Ships are ripped from their moorings and hurled into one another by the storm. Masts splinter, hulls collide, men tumble overboard into a bubbling, merciless sea. The sound is a deafening noise. Thunder, wind, the crunch of wood, and the screams of thousands of panicked soldiers and sailors. On shore, the samurai and villagers watch in awe and terror as the Typhoon devours the Mongol fleet. To them, it must have felt like witnessing the hand of the gods. Entire ships are picked up by towering waves and smashed against coastal rocks. The Mongols try to survive. Some lash their ships together with chains and planks to form floating platforms, hoping to ride out the tempest. But it's no use. Ship after ship founders. Many invaders who had disembarked to fight now scramble to find any boat to escape the onslaught. In a vivid account recorded by Marco Polo, who heard the tale in China, the Mongol fleet attempted to flee out to open sea to escape the coast, only to be caught by the Typhoon's full fury and smashed to pieces by colliding with one another in the rough ocean. For 2 days, the Typhoon rages. When the skies finally clear, the scale of destruction is revealed. The Mongol invasion force has been annihilated. Thousands of waterlogged corpses and shattered ships' timbers wash ashore on Japan's beaches. It's said that out of the huge armada, perhaps as much as half of the force was lost to the storm. One Chinese account indicates roughly 100,000 troops were left drifting or drowned. The few ships that survived limped back to Korea or China. Many of those on board were wounded, starving, and in shock. For the Japanese, this was nothing short of a miracle. Samurai warriors combed the beaches after the storm, executing any stranded invaders they found among the wreckage. Those few survivors were made slaves rather than killed. The Kamikaze Typhoon of 1281 entered lore as a divinely sent savior. Japan had stared annihilation in the face and yet emerged unscathed, thanks to a sudden wind from the heavens. The Mongols, undefeated on land from Europe to the Middle East to China, had been foiled by the seas and storms of Japan. The invasion was over. Kublai Khan would never again be able to threaten Japan. His attention was consumed by troubles elsewhere in his empire, and he died in 1294 with the dream of conquering Japan unfulfilled. Japan's victory over the Mongols was not just military. It became foundational to Japanese identity. In the wake of the invasions, the Japanese truly began to see their land as divinely protected. The word kamikaze, or divine wind, took on a near mythical status, symbolizing that the gods watch over Japan. For generations, children would hear the story of how the brave samurai and a timely typhoon saved their homeland. Culturally, the invasions reinforced a sense of uniqueness and unity in Japan. The idea that when faced with an overwhelming outside threat, the Japanese people stood together and prevailed, with a little help from nature. This boosted national confidence and a belief in Japan's invincibility against invaders. That's not to say the victory came without cost or change. In fact, the Mongol invasions profoundly shook Japan's political and social order. The Kamakura shogunate that led the defense found itself in trouble after the war. Financing and rewarding a war effort against 2 massive invasions had drained the state's coffers. Thousands of samurai had answered the call to defend the nation, expecting rewards of land or wealth for their service. But since the defeated Mongols held no territory in Japan to confiscate and give as reward, many samurai were left unpaid and discontented. Over the ensuing decades, that discontent festered, contributing to political instability. Indeed, about 50 years later in 1333, the Kamakura shogunate would collapse, and the Mongol invasions were a key factor that set the stage for its downfall. Militarily, Japan evolved. Samurai warfare techniques and equipment adapted in response to the Mongols. Legends say that after experiencing Mongol armor, Japanese swordsmiths improved their blades to be more resilient. Some theories suggest this led to changes in the katana design. Samurai also learned the value of new tactics. They built coastal fortifications, embraced better organization for group combat, and maintained vigilance for external threats. The use of primitive bombs by the Mongols was the first time gunpowder had been used against Japan. a fact not forgotten by the Japanese, who later would adopt firearms in their own warfare once introduced by the Portuguese in the 16th century. The invasions essentially forced Japan to modernize aspects of its defense and open their eyes to international warfare beyond their traditional style. In summary, the Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281 changed Japan in profound ways. National identity. The Kamikaze legend cemented the idea of Japan as Shinkoku, a divine land under the god's special protection. This fostered unity and pride, and even centuries later, the notion of the Kamikaze would resurface. Political shifts. The Kamakura shogunate's prestige suffered, weakening its rule, while regional lords gained influence. The balance of power in Japan subtly shifted, contributing to the end of Kamakura rule and the rise of new factions. Military developments. Japan upgraded its defenses, building walls, watchtowers, and keeping a standing coastal alert. Samurai learned to contend with organized mass assaults rather than just individual duels. Warfare in Japan became less about ritual and more about effectiveness. The trauma of the invasions lingered, ensuring that Japan wouldn't be caught off guard by foreign tactics again. Japan stood strong, and the Mongols never returned. The invasion that changed Japan did not end in conquest, but it did transform the nation internally. Feudal Japan learned that it could unite against a common foe, that its samurai code combined with strategic adaptation could overcome even the mightiest of enemies. This story has endured as one of history's great what-ifs and near misses, reminding us how a twist of fate, be it a timely typhoon or a courageous last stand, can reshape the course of history. So, what do you think was the decisive factor in this epic showdown? Would the Mongols have ultimately conquered Japan if not for the Kamikaze typhoons? Or would the samurai's fierce resistance have prevailed regardless? It's a fascinating question, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most extraordinary invasions, hit that like button and subscribe to The Epic and Extraordinary for more thrilling history showdowns. We've got plenty more epic tales of warriors, battles, and twists of fate on the way, so don't miss our next video. Arigato for watching, and until next time, stay epic and extraordinary.